2, grid. Yeah, you are. It's yours. You are on the stage. Yep. Thank you.
So, hello to this panel, and first I want to thank Alex.
Direkt.
Okay. I want to thank Alex for invitation here, and I want also to thank two of my good friends from NAFO who helped me to speak today here, because this is a language I never used before in front of an audience, and so excuse my mistakes in the further. Lauter? I want to tell you a few words about myself. I started to ask questions quite early in a system where questions were not allowed. And when I get the chance to go to university, I joined immediately groups of rebellion, and these groups tried to reform the universities at first, and then we knew that this would not be possible without a revolution or reform of the whole system. And so we joined or found other groups and other communities, and these were, for instance, the Neues Forum, which was the main rebellion institution in the GDR and in this time. And after the wall was falling, we all thought that the Cold War is done and we won this and we will be on the good side. And when the attack of, when Russian attack of Ukraine starts, then my first thought was, we were not ready with our work. It's not done. And so I feel really close to Ukrainians, and I feel like they finished what we have started at the beginning in 1989 or before. Unfortunately, they are not so lucky as we in the GDR were, because in my time the system was not strong enough to send tanks. So what I'm faced with in my home country in Saxonia is completely different picture, and I want to talk about this today. When you drive through East Germany and leave the main highways and streets for traveling through a rural region, you will meet a very disturbing scene there. You have flags, Nazi flags, you have flags with Russian colors, you have posters and demonstrations and glorification of Russia, and you find a revival of Russian language, of symbols, and Russian music also. And this is a picture in my village, and this was about 2 or 3 weeks after the starting the attack, a Russian attack in Ukraine. And 1 week before, I took a Ukrainian family in my home, and this was the reaction for that. And you should pay attention of the language. You know, this is in German, this is my address. And the other one is in Russian. It's not Ukraine, it's Russian. And I will tell you later why it is written in Russian and not in Ukraine and not in English or in German. So, at the same time, when we see this, we also see that especially in East Germany, we have a revival of Nazi ideas, of fascist ideas. And this is not only here and there, but it's overall in East Germany. And we see that growing movement and political parties on the far right wing, and they also glorify Russia. And this is a really, really dangerous situation. Because NAFO, which I joined immediately after the attack of Russia in Ukraine, because NAFO is fighting that propaganda, we looked for reasons for the situation in East Germany. And we started to understand that we have to see the history, our history, as a sequence of generations. And that opens the view to happenings that our generation already has forgotten, but that still have a lot of influence in our society. And this is also my history, because I was born in a country that no longer exists at the moment, but this country is still part of me, and it is my task every day, every hour to prove myself and to test myself if infiltration is still working in my mind. So remind these big lines of generations was for us the entry to find a really new understanding of a phenomenon that I'm faced with every day in my home, this strange and very disturbing longing of the East Germans for Russia. So we found in this way old traumas and a dangerous mixture of old and new traumas in our society in East Germany, but we also saw that to face this trauma, we have the possibility of solutions, and this was why we talked about this. We want to share about this with you because the war in Ukraine, but also the war that Russia is leading against us in the West, maybe will be decided in East Germany. If this far-right movement we see in East Germany will win the war, will win the elections in East Germany, will take place in this year, in autumn in 2024, then they will try to stop the help for Ukraine, and they will try to stop the budget for army and defense in Germany. And that will open the door for Russia and Russian attack on Western democratic nations, not only Germany. So to understand Russian tactics and vectors of attack in our society will help us to prevent these attacks in the future and leads ideally to a kind of self-hygiene, which we will need. What trauma do we talk about? The first trauma, step back. The first trauma is the trauma of World War II and the following Soviet occupation. And the second trauma is the oppression in the GDR and a practice that is not so very well known in our society. This is uprooting, family uprooting, especially in the GDR. The mental and social problems as a result of these traumas, together with new traumas from restrictions in the GDR, seem to be vectors of attack by Russia and for Russian political subversion today. It's no fun fact, but a fact that Putin was living for a couple of years in Germany, in Dresden, which is the capital of Saxonia in the southeast of East Germany. And he was there as an agent of KGB, and he was responsible for recruiting new agents for KGB and also for Stasi, which was, you all know this, the secret service of the GDR. And so that means he knows very well the techniques of secret services, and he used them all over his political time. He knows also the special mental and social factors in East Germany very exactly, and he uses also this knowledge. What we can see here is the difference between the meanings of, the opinions of people in East and West Germany about Russia and Ukraine. You can see that about 60% of the East Germans think that NATO is responsible for the conflict, for the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And this is in West Germany only 25%. You see that in East Germany we have about 50% that not fully agree that Ukraine is an independent nation and not a part of Russia. Of course, a lot of scientists and politicians see these differences and try to explain them. And actually, we have some reasons that they identified. First, we had a very strong propaganda against the Free West in the GDR. And this was omnipresent. We had this in schools, in media, in TV, in newspapers, in politics, and also in sports. And this is why the East Germans don't trust in everything that comes from the West. They don't trust in German government because of these bias from the GDR era. and because of their own experiences of reunification. And there's another point, and this is a lot of Germans think that they know a lot about Russia because they lived under Russian oppression. They went there by traveling to Russia, they learned their language, they studied on Russian universities, and so they think they have a lot of information, much more than other people, and they define their own identify very near to Russia. Russian gives them much more a feeling of being home than the West is able to. So the Russians are a little bit like the Borg. And this is their self-representation is not only in the era of GDR, but always is, that they feel as a really superpower. And the culture and inner structure in Russia is so well created and long tested that they think it would be the best for every nation on the world to be a part of this and to join the Russian system. And of course they see that some nations don't want this and are not understand this, and so they think it's better for them to bring them the Russian system against their will. And this is why they use the means of subversion and infiltration. They create dependencies like in Germany, and they fake the history. And they did this during the Soviet era to submit other nations and ethnicities, and these techniques never stopped till today. The word they found for this is the so-called Russki Mir. In the last few years, we in the West established the term hybrid war for the same thing. But now, on our point of view, because we are the nations that are under attack by Russki Mir, and the East Germans feel this as Russki Mir and not as hybrid war, and this is the big difference. So they are still under submission of Russian Empire and could not understand why Ukraine don't want to go home. So what I see in my home country, Saxonia, is the real inability of my fellow human beings to finally understand the aggressiveness of Russia. So my good fellas from NAFO and I looked for another reason or other reasons for that, and this is the so-called transgenerational trauma. This is well known in the science and described by leading scientists in psychology. The theory says that a trauma that came over a generation, such as war or occupation, can be passed on the next generation, especially when the traumatized generation does not talk about this or is not able to or is not allowed to talk about this. In East Germany, we found that after World War II, during the Red Army punished the defeated Germans extremely hard. And they did this in their special way, using hunger and murder and massive rapings and deportations and lootings and torture. So to talk about this was not possible because the East Germans felt deeply guilty, of course, and also the talk about that was forbidden. First by the Red Army, of course, and then later by the system of the GDR, which concealed every crime and every mistake, especially of the leaders and of the Soviets. The following generation developed a strange feeling about the Russians. They did not really know why, but it is a really strange feeling, a mixture of very strong fear, of admiration and glorification of the Soviets. It's a little bit like Stockholm Syndrome. The drama of their own guilty during the World War II, the drama of punishing by Red Army, then the drama of living under restrictions and dictatorship and of forbidden words. were followed by the trauma of fear during the time of change in 1989, and then the overwhelming changes during reunification. And not a single one of these traumas was processed, and not one trauma even was simply spoken out. So this is a really big problem. Another fact is not really been on focus till today, and this is that family bondings were systematically broken by educational and social system in the GDR. Most children went to a pre-kindergarten from the age of 6 weeks. And the mothers went to work full-time from this moment, so most of the babies stayed in the pre-kindergarten 9 to 10 hours, and they stayed at home only for the time of sleeping. That's why the parents had no bonding to the children, and the children had no bondings to the parents, and official state actors took care for babies, for children and young persons in the system. These actors changed really often, and this was responsible that the children could not develop strong roots and self-confidence. They are still not sure what to do and what to think till today. These people still are looking for state actors who help them to understand or lead them. And this is because they have, as I told you before, no trust in German government, they try to find other people to lead them. And if you ask them directly in talks, then they say, oh, Putin is a really strong leader. And this also leads to that glorification of Russia. Russia seems to be the parental system to them as the GDR was before. When the system of the GDR took independency and responsibility from its children, how can they be independent and responsible today? They never learned that. They remained at the level of a dependent child. And they are, and this is important, not really guilty for that. It was not their decision. On the other hand, every dictatorship is not working without people who follow the dictator. East Germans see themselves more as victims, but deep inside they know that they are also perpetrators, of course. Then they were part of the system. Under this painful knowledge, it is nearly impossible for them to start to process their traumas. So after 33 years of walking together as Germans in one country, this is still relevant. The reunification was not able to start an understanding of the different systems in the former two German countries. Just the wording, the language is not the same. East Germans don't really understand the democratic system and how it works. And they still don't feel responsible for themselves and for the working of this system. They don't have also an idea of their own role in the era of the GDR. So they block processing and they still don't talk. The feedback from the west parts of Germany is also not helpful at the moment because many people in the west don't want to see the problems of transgenerational trauma and the consequences today. And of course, there are some black shadows on their own history. So after we formed these theses, we tried to speak directly to East Germans into Twitter spaces, and what's really interesting, because some of them opened and started to talk, and we had really very strong emotional reactions on this. But back to Russia. How uses Russia this knowledge? Russia supports extremist groups and political parties in Europe and especially in Germany and in East Germany, like AfD and BSW. The members of these parties are mostly older men and women with a longer GDR past, and they use terms and narratives of Russia. They use fake news, disinformation, and half-truths to disrupt evidence and knowledge. And they trigger the narrative of strong Russia and of punishment after World War II. And they do this also by spreading horrifying pictures of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And so the people remember to be loyal without any questions was the most important skill in the GDR. So it seems better to the East Germans to glorify Russia. If Russia wins, they will be safe and not be punished like people in Ukraine. And this is why they wrote at the poster in Russian language. This is the signal for Russians. So Russia remains the East Germans in many ways that the USA is the real enemy. This is what the East Germans learned in the school from the first class, and they say, for this reason, Germany should be neutral, so they can never, ever again be guilty and never would be punished again. They say Ukraine should submit under Russian control or be a buffer state to make sure that Russians don't come too close to Germany. When in the GDR, children had to learn the Russian language in the school, learn Russian folk songs, listen to Russian classic music in theater and read Russian literature, play with Russian toys, see Russian fairy tales on TV and see Soviet flag everywhere, they must understand Russian culture and language as a part of their own identity, and this is still today. The Russian view is either you are on our way to develop the new human being, which is defined by Russian people, or you are the enemy. If we understand this way of thinking of the East Germans, we can see that they have no perception of individual ethnic groups in Russian Federation till today. The East Germans have no trust in USA and in the West, and so they don't feel to be part of West Germany. They don't feel to be a part of NATO and of EU. Russia uses this by attacking German government, which is dominated by West Germans, and they attack USA, NATO, and EU. Parties which are supported by Russians demand to leave EU and NATO. The Russian media, like Russia Today, attacked science and official media in Germany during the pandemic and destroyed every trust of many East Germans in science and media completely. So, but what about the other nations in East Europe? All of them lived under the same Soviet system as the East Germans, but people there are free of Russophilia. No, in the opposite, they fight Russia and do a lot to stay independent from Russia. The people in other countries suffered the same way, but they had never to feel guilty. So when in East Germany people thought that war crimes of the Red Army were just fair to them, people in other countries started to hate Russians for that. Also, only the GDR had to pay reparations to USSR, and the Red Army downright plundered the territory of GDR. The denazification of GDR made by Russia meant massive rape, hunger, deportation, looting, and torture. And so we see deep traumatization and no possibility of process in the GDR, which was different from what happened in other countries. And the GDR was also the first country where resistance was broken in a brutal way by the Soviets. And so the year 1953 can be seen as a reminder to the East Germans that the Soviet Union would never tolerate any rebellion. In the following years, one of the most effective secret services was built up, and this was the Stasi. Stasi and KGB controlled everything, really everything in the GDR. The political opinions, the political parties, the connections of work and friendship, educational system, the schools, the universities, the language, the thoughts, the wishes, the dreams, and the families. And this is why there was an extremely distrust in the society. Another difference in the fact that the GDR was the frontline is the fact that the GDR is the frontline state of Warsaw Pact. GDR had to be better in economy and politics and education and everything, and better meant as Soviet as possible. The secret services understood that the GDR was the only country in the Warsaw Pact that was exposed to media in their own language. And so the influence of Western media was extremely high. And seeing that danger, they controlled more and more, even privacy, mails, phone calls, contacts, nearly everything in a society. We think that historical science should pay more attention on this. Ukraine is one of these nations that belong to the same Soviet system as the GDR. We see during Russian occupation of Ukraine territories psychological pressure, rapings, we see torture and looting, and Ukraine children deported by Russians. When they come back to Ukraine, some of them came back and they talk about manipulations and indoctrinations. And so we understand by sending them back to Ukraine, Russia may hope to use them later as carriers of subversion. There will be some dangers for Ukraine after the ending of this Russian aggression, and we should exchange ideas of solution. What does this all mean for Russia? Replacing the government in Russia will not change the political and social situation in Russia. Most of the Russians are deeply changed in their personality because of traumatization and manipulation. They are useful for any system of dictatorship and for any regime. Maybe there will be ethnicities that want to free from Russian repression, but what worked in other nations like GDR will also work there. The Russification is much deeper in these people than it ever was in East Germany. We should pay attention on that and find now strategies to help these people in the case of that Russia is crushing. How can we break this circle? The psychological wounds should be healed to be no longer a point of attack for manipulation. First of all, we should encourage East Germans to speak about their feelings, their fears, their experiences, and we must listen to them. Sometimes this is hard, not only because of the dialect, because of hard facts, but it is absolutely necessary. We should discuss our common values in an European context and in a German context. We need to find a common language to understand each other. We should emphasize what we reach together, and we should develop a healthy kind of proud. We need a revaluation of the history of East Germany and recognition of these special ways of life. We should give the East Germans a new and better power of self-efficiency and self-confidence, but based on our democratic values. And to be able to do that, we need much more political and historical education. We need citizen dialogue formats, podcasts, panel discussions, East-West, perhaps Twitter spaces, and in the following, we have to encourage both East and West Germans to question their own biography and narratives. We need also celebrities to do the first steps in this, and we need awareness of disturbed family relationships and programs to support the healing process in the society and in the families. And this is necessary to check and change. It is necessary really to check and change our education system and prove our history books and our language, with both maybe contain outdated narratives. This maybe will be hard, but also this will be an exciting way to become a nation, and this in the same moment. We want to invite players from Eastern Europe to join us and to watch us, and to help us and create a new way of conversation and collaboration in Europe. Listen to each other carefully, discuss and find values that are worth to fight for together. And learn from each other to deal with traumatization and indoctrination under Soviet and Russian occupation, to heal the wounds that still hurts us all. And by doing this, we will become a strong and healthy new family of nations that is powerful enough to fend off any attack. Thank you. So I don't know if anybody has questions. I don't know if I am fit enough in language to answer, but I try.
It was very fascinating. It was also very unexpected knowing that the other post-Soviet countries are very supportive of Ukraine and therefore the differences, and you explained it very well. But when you were showing the polls, but also in West Germany, the numbers were not half, but they were still quite high. Like almost 40-somewhat% thinks that Putin is doing a good job fighting the elites and other things in the polls. Yeah. So it might, I mean, you have the uniqueness of the GDR, but in West Germany, these ideas are also have a ground and are growing, and how do you explain that?
I'm not West German, so it's a bit difficult for me, but I can tell you that because we have the same language, we have influence from each other to both sides. And we had that influence of Soviet propaganda also in the West, because there was a mixture. And you know, Olaf Scholz was a few times, I think 9 times, in some holiday camp with some leaders of the party of SED, of the main party in East Germany, in the German Democratic Republic. And I don't want to say that he is a Soviet agent or something like that, but there is a big influence on both sides. And we have to, and this is what I meant when I said we have some dark captures in the Western history too, and we have to talk about this. And this maybe is the reason why West Germans don't really want to talk about that.
So I think the story in West Germany is really different. I think in East Germany, we have a strong push of right-wing pro-Russians. And in West Germany, we have a strong push of left-wing West Germans for Russia. Because there's a long tradition in West Germany that Russia infiltrated the left-wing movements and this rather social movements and pacifistic movements for decades. Yeah? And so I think the sources of why people support Russia is very different in West and in East Germany. And we need to, if we want to fight that, we need to be aware of that.
So, yeah, that's right. But we need to pay attention on one very difficult fact. What we see in the last time, and this is really to be mentioned, is that under the supporters of Ukraine, we have some people who try to do our picture, to make our picture of Russia a little bit more positive, step by step, one by one. And this is a really dangerous moment. We have to face that Russia is aggressive, and we have to say this to us ourselves every single day. Not be in danger to see Russia as a country that is not aggressive or not so much aggressive, and you can talk with them. No, you cannot talk to them. This is really a big, big problem. And this is in East Germany as well as in West Germany, and also in France, in Britain, and everywhere.
My family fled from the Soviet Union, and for me was it really bad to see that the German people speak really romantic about Soviet Union, and also the symbolic from Soviet Union are normally in Germany. And for me it's really bad to see that Germans don't reflect about the history from it, and that's a big, big problem. And Russia know that this this point is a big opinion for propaganda to say we are the freedom from the fascismus. Fascism, yes, and we are the right one, and that are the bad one because we shooting the Nazis and Ukrainians are Nazis and something else, and that's a big problem that we don't speak about the history from Soviet Union, something else.
This is why we need political education. You must understand when the GDR and West Germany joined, then usually if you come to Germany, you have to make courses, lessons and anything, and you have to make a test. And after this, you can take part in a society, not before. But East Germans never had anything like this. They got the passport, and then they were Germans. There was no educational support. And this is really a big problem, and this is really a big mistake, and we have to change this.
Yes, but also in schools we don't speak about the history from Soviet Union. It's they speak romantic about it.
Yeah, that's the biggest
really,
problem. Yes.
My family tell me about the things what they do about Ukrainians or about Romanian and something else. And in Germany they say, the Soviets are so good ones, and they hunting Nazis and something else, and that's so strange. But
yeah, it's strange to me too, because I was in a rebellion in the resistance movement in the GDR from 1987. So I always thought this is the wrong system. I don't want this. But these people who were in these groups were about 10% of the GDR population, 10 to 12%, not more. And all the others are at the same time victims and perpetrators. They were part of the system, and it's really hard for them to understand this because of infiltration, and they never learned about this. And so it's really necessary to talk with them. But I know this is really hard. There's a little story when I thought in 2015 to take Syrian people in my house to help them. 1 week later, when I talked to my neighbor about that, some guys from the village came and said to me, if you do that, your house will burn. And this is really not easy to tell them, hey, what's about you? That's not the right way. You cannot talk to them. This is a form of radicalization, which Sarah told you before. This is level 4, perhaps, already. And this is quite hard. There are some groups who have structures of like police in the villages already, and they are weaponed. These are hunters and such people who have weapons, and it's really dangerous situation. So we have to find the solutions, and we need a European discourse about this, I think. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Grit, for your insights into Eastern Germany.